I think other than not just that, but also being involved in like extracurriculars too, playing sports. I did some like, do you know the Sears Festival?
Yeah, drama festival. Yep.
Yeah, the drama festival. I did some theater and stuff too. So I think like being involved in those also dictated a lot as to how. I think actually now that I think about it, it also determines how I've learned too. Because playing sports, I've been called out a lot by coaches to be able to say like halftime or in between periods to say like, hey man, you messed up in front of everybody. And it has definitely allowed me to grow like a thicker skin and be able to be called out. Whether it's like getting in trouble in class or if it's making a mistake or whatever it is. Now that I think about it, that's definitely changed a lot. Even doing theater, being in front of people, and again being called out and saying like, hey, you're reading this wrong, or you know, your blocking isn't right, whatever the case, changed how I've been able to process information in university.
Yeah, I think that's, again, I played a ton of sports growing up too, and my closest friends in high school were in drama, and it's like that piece about like in the moment criticism. And like even criticism is a funny word. Like if you Google criticism, look up the definition, it's really about like helpful feedback, right? But when you say criticism, like that's a dirty word to most people. It's like oh my, don't be critical of me or don't critique me, right? It's a negative thing where it's like, no, I'm trying to offer you helpful feedback. Like that's what criticism is by definition. And like when we're in sports, your coach is constantly critiquing your form or what you're doing, what you did in the game, what you did in that moment. And in some ways, like for some kids, like oh my god, that was really harsh. Whereas, and you see that with your teammates too, right? Like how does the coach talk and what's their style and who reacts positively to that and who reacts negatively to that. But I think again, sports or acting or drama or dance or those areas, it's more of a normal process and it's normalized to get like more what we quote unquote harsh feedback in the moment and then adjust and learn off that. Whereas if you don't have those experiences, you might not have that many opportunities to experience that, and you may be look at it differently and you react to it differently.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting that we all of us automatically assume that criticism is negative. Like there's just so many negative connotations towards it.
Honestly, it's one like I've talked to a lot of people that fascinates me because again, what do we mean by criticism? And again, I said anyone listening to this, like Google it and like Google that definition of criticism. Like what do we actually define it as? Because if you ask people their definition of criticism, most people define it as having that like negative or mean connotation. Like you're not being nice to me because you're criticizing me right now. Whereas, like, no, I mean, is that, and again, sometimes it is that, don't get me wrong, of course. But by definition, criticism is a feedback loop. Like, you're getting feedback on it. And, like, who are you to, like, but it's like, I'm perfect. Like, don't ever give me feedback. And like, that's kind of the other pushback to that, right? Definitely. It's like, no, I don't ever want to hear from you. I have no interest in improving. I don't want feedback from anybody because I'm either great or I don't want to hear from you. But criticism is a chance to give feedback to others.
And I don't... And I guess like everything is obviously subjective, but the way I want to improve and grow and succeed, you're gonna need to be criticized. And I don't understand, like, if you're someone who wants to do whatever it is, like if you want to do anything in life and actually do well at it, you kind of need the criticism. And so I don't understand why people wouldn't necessarily want it, because at the end of the day, it's just about getting better.
100%. If your goal is to improve in anything in life, your relationships, your work, your own learning, whatever it be, sports, athletics, whatever it is, like criticism is feedback from others who have some insights that we get to decide to do what we want to do with it still. You don't need to take it. You're like, okay, cool, man, thanks. I appreciate it. Like, I disagree with you, so I'm not going to take it. You get to decide what you want to do with that feedback. But yeah, I agree. Like, why have we made criticism a dirty word? The other one I said is like failure. If you talk with the entrepreneurial space, like, people like seek out failure. Scientists seek out, like, it's about the scientific method. It's iteration process. Like when something doesn't go the way you hoped it would, that's learning. And like they're like, great, cool. I know that doesn't work now. I just learned something. In business, you talk to entrepreneurs in this area, and they're like, like it was like I have 5 companies that tanked hard, and I learned great lessons from those failures. Definitely. And that's why my 6th company was a really strong success, because I learned from those failures. But failure is that dirty word too, and especially in school too, right? Like again, if from us we have that mentality, and I think parents and students and teachers all play a part in this, but like if you take how often do we encourage students to take risks with their learning? Because they'd be like, I took a risk and it didn't work out, so my mark is a 60 instead of a 90. If I just could have taken the safe route, and I would have got my 90. But like, how much did you learn from that, right? Whereas taking that risk and trying something new and it tanking, but like getting some feedback from your teacher about why it tanked, and then going back and trying it and processing and learning and using it as a learning experience. Failure is our best teacher.
I agree.
By far, but again, it's a dirty word, and on general, most society tries to avoid failure like the plague.
Right. And I have found that, like, there aren't really losses in life. Like, people will say, like, oh, I got an L or whatever, and it's not really a loss, it's a lesson. Like, it's still an L, but you learned as opposed to have lost.
Yeah.
And a big person, or just someone that has, I guess, articulated that pretty well to me was a lawyer who judged a moot court competition a while ago at Laurier, and he was saying that a lot of students who come into law school don't really understand what it is to fail, because you go into law school and you go to med school, generally you're top of your class through high school and through university, and so when you go to med school and you go to law school, you're starting to get 40s and 50s that aren't 95s, and you can't handle it. And he was saying, like, it's important to understand how to get hit, and his personal story was that whenever he was training fighters, so I guess he was a fighter as well, he would dress them up in padding and equipment and just beat the crap out of them, just so they understood what it was like to get hit.
Absolutely. Law is a fascinating one, because I agree, like, it's generally like, our quote-unquote best and brightest from a grade standpoint going through, and so you go through high school and your undergrad and law school just pulling like 90s all the way through. And then you go into the real, like, all our lawyers have gone through that experience. But again, if it's a case where they're fighting against each other, someone wins that case and someone loses that case. Like, everyone's bad in 50, right? On average, like, there's always one of the two, you're always losing a case there, right? And so you go through your entire life just like, quote unquote winning at everything and feeling like you're this massive success. But then we have all these lawyers who are going out and losing on average half of their cases. How do you deal with that, and how do you manage that, right? It's like, what, I lost? Like, I don't lose. Like, that's not what I'm used to. I'm used to just like getting out there. I think, again, sports or acting are great areas to experience that, right? Like, teams don't go 82-0 in the NBA. You have to learn to deal with loss. And what is that like? And what do you take away from that? How do you iterate and improve from that? I think there's good lessons we can take from those areas that we don't necessarily apply well to other facets of life right now.